In the official testimony, Ilya Voronov's touch had been called an assault on the air. The court representative explained it calmly, almost wearily. That wording would settle the question for the guards, of why an ordinary human field medic had been allowed anywhere near her body in the first place. Voronov could be declared a criminal, while the court would be nothing more than the victim of his arrogance. If you strike out that word, he added, the commission will ask why your retinue failed to protect you, and why you yourself could not stop a man who disobeyed an order. Ayala held her pen above the document. Beside it already lay the seal that could close the matter with a single motion. But by signing that word, she would have endorsed more than the accusation against Voronov. She would have admitted that her guards had lost control, and that she herself was incapable of ruling her own court. The princess crossed out the word assault. She left unauthorized intervention. For the first time, the court representative fell silent. Ayala pressed her personal seal beneath the correction. Her testimony could no longer be turned into a weapon of accusation against Voronov. That alone was enough to put her authority at risk. That was why the story began, not with the rescued princess's gratitude, but with her refusal to strengthen the accusation against the man everyone demanded be called an attacker. To understand what came next, we must return to the night when the finest doctors had every reason to declare Ayala beyond hope. That night, Voronov noticed what they had missed and refused to accept the death sentence. For that, he met with contempt, lost the right to act, and wagered his life and his working hand, yet still saw the rescue through to the end. Then it turned out this was not the first such wager of his life, and Ayala's trust in him proved not to be a reward for saving her, but a boundary she herself had been forced to draw. The double rhythm disappeared. The chief court physician kept his fingers at the base of Ayala's neck for a while longer, as though he did not trust his own hearing. Then he withdrew his hand and ordered the painful interventions stopped. No one in the chamber objected. Records of earlier cases were laid on the table. Several dozen names, ages, and identical final lines. After the second, involuntary rhythm of breathing disappeared. Not one member of her people had regained consciousness. The doctors had tried to continue treatment for an hour, then 3, and finally until the patient was completely exhausted. They did not restore consciousness. They only prolonged the agony. "We no longer have the right to torment her," the chief physician said. It was neither a cowardly refusal nor an attempt to protect his reputation. He was making the decision that had been made many times before at the bedsides of the dying. For the people on his team, this sign marked the boundary beyond which persistence ceased to be help. Voronov stood against the wall among the junior staff, watching the physicians leave Ayala's bedside one by one. A ceremonial attendant brought in the morning censer. Before the entire retinue, he displayed the unbroken palace seal on the resin package, opened it, and announced the batch mark aloud. An assistant found the same mark in the registry of ceremonies that had been conducted without incident. The chief physician gave an almost imperceptible nod. The censer was placed at the head of the bed, and a thin trail of smoke rose from it. To everyone present, it was as harmless a part of the farewell as the seals on the doors. It had been checked exactly as protocol required. So the physicians continued to watch for the only sign they trusted, whether the vanished rhythm would return. It did not. The guards began clearing the chamber. One of the warriors pulled the heavy door, partly shut, to muffle the voices in the corridor. At that moment, Ayala's head turned almost imperceptibly toward the narrowing strip of light. Her next breath broke off halfway through. Voronov pushed away from the wall. "Open it." The warrior turned, but the steward entering the chamber had already thrown the door open. Ayala drew in air. One breath came more evenly, then a second. The court physician noticed the movement of her head, checked her neck, and went still again, waiting for the double rhythm. To him, it was nothing more than a dying body's erratic contraction. A few moments later, her breathing weakened again, and he lowered his hand. The steward stepped out. The guard closed the doorway. Ayala reached toward the door again, only slightly, as though she could not lift her head but was trying at least to turn her chin. Her breathing faltered at almost the same point. This time, Voronov reached the entrance before the doors could meet. "Do not touch her, just leave the doorway open." The chief physician stepped between him and the bed. "The verdict has been pronounced. I heard it. Let me test one connection. What connection could a human see when he does not even know the normal rhythm of our breathing?" Voronov pointed not at Ayala's body, but at the door. When the doorway closes, she turns her head and loses her breath. When it opens, her breathing returns for several breaths. I am not saying I know the cause. I am asking you to repeat the action and see whether the response repeats as well." The courtiers heard every word. The chief physician looked back at them, then turned again to the human medic. A few random movements against dozens of confirmed deaths. An arrogant savage decides one glance is enough to lecture us on mercy. No, one glance is enough only to justify a test. Voronov stepped toward the bed, but two guards immediately blocked his way. One took the medical kit from his shoulder. The other shoved the human across the threshold. "A foreign specialist has no right to intervene after a final decision without my authorization," the chief physician declared. "Now you have neither authorization nor access." The door closed in Voronov's face. Nearby lay the logbook in which the staff confirmed the termination of treatment. Voronov opened it to the last page, found the line recording his refusal, and entered his service number. Beneath it, he demanded that the observed reaction not be treated as a death throw, and took sole responsibility for continuing the intervention. The chief physician saw the entry over the guard's shoulder. "That signature is illegal. Then forward it to my command." The entry was forwarded immediately. The human mission's reply arrived before the ink had dried. Ilya Voronov's field medical clearance was suspended pending an inquiry. From that moment on, he was no longer authorized to work as a medic, touch the patient, or issue medical orders. Ayala was dying behind the door. His kit was in the guard's hands, but his number was already in the logbook, and it could not be taken back. Voronov had staked his profession on repeatability, which everyone else had dismissed as the final reflex of a dying body. The steward of Ayala's retinue did not allow Voronov to be taken away at once. He stopped the guard who was already pulling the medic by the shoulder and looked at the closed door, behind which Ayala's breathing had once again become almost inaudible. "His observation cannot be considered proven," the chief physician said, "but you can no longer call her condition unchanged." "That is exactly what I heard," the steward replied. "We will check before declaring her dead." He ordered the guards to open the door. Voronov remained outside the threshold and began to count. 1. The door panels parted. Nothing changed with Ayala's first breath. With the second, her breathing steadied, and after several breaths, the missing double rhythm appeared in it again. Close. The door shut. The rhythm vanished. 2. Open. The guards opened the panels again, without changing the bed's position or touching the sensor. The second rhythm returned for several breaths. Close. It vanished again. The chief physician was no longer looking at Voronov. He was looking at the door. 3. Open. This time, everyone waited in silence. The second rhythm returned. They closed the door, and it disappeared again. 3 times the same response followed the same movement. The test did not explain the cause or make Voronov Ayala's doctor, but the earlier verdict that the boundary was irreversible could no longer be considered final. "The observation is accepted," the steward said. "But Voronov remains outside the threshold. Do not return his kit. He is forbidden to touch the princess." The source of the reaction was still unknown, and the authorization applied only to the door. Footsteps sounded in the corridor. The princess's retinue had come to say farewell. The guards opened the door just wide enough for them to enter. The cold corridor air touched Ayala's chamber. Ayala jerked her chin. The movement was weak, almost imperceptible, but Voronov saw it at once. She was trying again to turn her head toward the passage. Her shoulder tensed beneath the blanket, her breathing faltered, and the servant walking at the front stopped. "Don't close it," Voronov said. The guard shoved him back. Voronov did not argue. He braced his foot against the bottom edge of the door and wedged himself into the narrow opening before it could shut. The guards threw their weight against him from both sides, but if he backed away, the few seconds of open passage would already be lost. He lunged inside. He had no kit, no gloves, no authorization. Only Ayala remained, lying too far from the door she was still reaching toward. Voronov reached the bed and slid one hand beneath her neck, the other beneath her shoulder. The princess was heavier than she appeared in her stillness. Her body resisted every movement. "Voronov, let her go!" the chief physician shouted. "Open the passage all the way. You are disobeying a direct order." "I know." He turned Ayala's face toward the door, then drew up her upper body, turning it along with her shoulders. This was not treatment. He was not trying to correct something he did not understand. He was holding her in the position she herself had been trying to reach, and stopping the guards from closing the only available space. One of the warriors grabbed Voronov by the collar and pulled him back. The second seized his forearm. The bed lurched. Ayala's fingers clenched convulsively in the fabric of his sleeve, but Voronov did not let go of her. "She is not your property," he hissed. "That is precisely why you will step away now," the physician said. The guards pulled harder. Voronov pressed his shoulder against the edge of the bed and held Ayala's head and upper body turned toward the open passage. Behind him, the guards were trying to close the door. In front of him, the physician was demanding that he release the princess, and the steward watched the struggle in silence. But the struggle did not stop. Voronov had already chosen the side of the door and was holding Ayala where she herself was trying to be. The guard pressed a spear to Voronov's throat so close that the cold of the metal came through his collar. "Step away on the count of 3, he said. "Otherwise you will be killed as an attacker of the air." The exit behind the guard remained open. Voronov saw it, heard the order, and understood that they were truly giving him a chance to survive. All he had to do was loosen his grip, take one step back, and let the others take charge of Ayala again. The threat would disappear along with him. 1. Ayala was breathing heavily against his shoulder. Her body was still straining toward the passage, as if a few seconds of open air were the only salvation available to her. 2. Voronov looked at her face. He could no longer claim to know why the door changed her breathing, but he knew something else. If he stepped away now, Ayala would return to her former position, and the door would be closed again. 3. He did not step away. Instead, Voronov put his shoulder beneath the princess's weight and pulled her tighter against him, holding her head and chest turned toward the open passage. To the guard, that was an answer. The spear came down. Ayala suddenly drew a breath on her own. Her body jerked against his shoulder, and the spear point's path changed. At the last moment, the guard deflected the strike so it would not pierce the air. The spear passed close by Voronov, then immediately returned to his throat. "Don't move," the warrior hissed. Voronov froze. He did not let go of Ayala, but he could no longer turn her or pull her closer. The point held him in place, while guards on both sides kept him from changing position, and the chief physician watched the princess, trying to understand what that breath taken on her own meant. Voronov watched too, just not her face. The morning censer was still smoldering above the head of the bed. The smoke rose in a thin stream, but the open door drew it into the corridor. It left the chamber almost horizontally, breaking apart in the cold air. And when the door leaves began to close, the current vanished. The smoke stopped leaving and spread back toward the bed, gathering above Ayala's face. Voronov remembered that the second rhythm disappeared at the same time. He could not raise his hand. He could not approach the censer. He could not even tell the guard to turn his head without risking a blow. "Doctor," he said, "watch the smoke." The chief physician did not answer. "Not me, the censer." The guard pressed the spear harder against his throat. "Be quiet." With the door open, the smoke leaves the chamber. With it closed, it gathers at the head of the bed. At that same moment, the second rhythm returns or disappears. "You've already checked the door 3 times. Check the source." "Are you giving orders again?" the physician asked. "I'm showing you what is happening in front of you. No one in the chamber has moved." The smoke continued to spread toward Ayala's face, while the spear remained against the throat of the human, who, only seconds earlier, could have been killed without consequence for the guard. The chief physician stepped closer, touching neither the princess nor Voronov. He looked at the censer, then at the open door, then back at Ayala's breathing. "Remove the source," he said. The guard did not lower his weapon. "The medic remains under control. Do not change the princess's position. No further contact." This was not permission for Voronov. They did not return his kit, lift the ban, or admit that he was right. The chief physician authorized only one test: remove the censer and see whether the connection they had found remained. Voronov tried to shift Ayala's weight onto his uninjured hand. At that moment, her protective spines caught on his glove. When he held onto the princess, the spines wrenched his wrist. Something crunched in the joint, and 2 fingers immediately lost all feeling and grip. He could release his hand and save the injured wrist, but then Ayala's body would have immediately slipped back into a dangerous position. So Voronov shifted her weight onto his shoulder and kept holding her, without releasing the glove. The injured hand answered with a sharp burst of pain. It hung at his side. When Voronov tried to pick up the medical kit lying nearby, the strap slipped from his weakened fingers, and the kit fell to the floor with a dull thud. He did not even look down. The censer stood right at the edge of the bed. Voronov could not reach it with his hand, So he braced his good foot against the base of the stand and slowly pushed. "Do not change her position," the chief physician repeated. "I'm not." The stand slid across the floor. Voronov pushed harder. The spear at his throat trembled, and the guard swore, but he did not strike. Any sudden movement might hit Ayala. The sensor crossed the threshold and stopped in the corridor. The smoke no longer drew toward the bed. The door was closed. Everyone waited. Before, Ayala's breathing had always faltered during that interval. Voronov continued supporting her with his good shoulder, although his arm was already trembling with the strain. He did not try to correct her position or ask them to open the door. What they were testing now was not his persistence, but what happened after the source was removed. The first breath passed, then the second. The double rhythm did not disappear. The guard with the spear continued to stand nearby, but the point gradually moved away from Voronov's throat. The chief physician kept his eyes on Ayala. He waited through the amount of time by which the previous failure should already have occurred, and only then nodded. "Release her." Voronov slowly withdrew his good shoulder. Ayala did not slip back into her previous dangerous position. Her body remained still, and her breathing did not falter. He took a step back, and for the first time, allowed himself to lower his injured arm. His hand would not rise. 2 fingers remained motionless, and his medical clearance had already been suspended. Ayala opened her eyes on her own. She did not focus her gaze right away. First, she turned her head from the closed door toward the people by the bed, as if checking whether she could truly choose the direction of her movement. Then she took an even breath. No one in the chamber said a word. Voronov stood nearby without the kit, without the authority to act, and with a hand that could no longer work as it had before. But now Ayala was breathing without his support, and when the chief physician looked at the closed door again, he no longer needed to announce that the previous verdict had been overturned. "Do not close the door." The voice was weak, but the order sounded firm enough to make the guard at the passage freeze. The door was left open. Voronov stood to one side, holding his injured hand against his chest. He did not approach the bed or ask whether she needed help. Now that decision had to be hers. But Ayala did not speak to him then. The chief physician returned to the bed, while Voronov was led outside the threshold again. Only later, when the princess's condition had stabilized, and the chief physician confirmed that her breathing maintained an even rhythm without outside support, Ayala herself ordered them to bring the man in. At her insistence, the door remained open. Voronov stopped beside the wall, at the distance she had indicated. Ayala shifted her gaze to the guards, her retinue, and the chief physician. "Move far enough down the corridor that you cannot hear us." "Your Highness, after what happened," the steward began. "That is my order." The guards, attendants, and steward withdrew beyond earshot. The chief physician was the last to leave. Voronov remained by the wall, where Ayala herself had placed him. She waited until the footsteps faded. "Do you understand why I turned toward the door? I saw that when the passage was closed, you reached toward the door. At the time, I did not know why, and your breathing faltered whenever the smoke gathered near your face again. Now you do," Ayala said. "When I was 9 years old, I was locked in a palace room during an uprising. Not for long. It was enough. Since then, I can stand before a closed door, speak, give orders, and pretend that nothing is happening. But the body remembers before I do. That is why I kept turning toward the door." She lowered her eyes to the blanket. "In the palace, a princess's fear becomes a weapon faster than any army. That was why not even the physicians knew about it." She looked at Voronov again. "You held me against my orders. If I had been conscious and told you to let go, would you have stopped?" The question did not sound like gratitude. It was a test, and the answer would determine whether her rescue became another form of power over her. Voronov did not answer at once. "If you are capable of choosing and clearly say no, I stop. Even if you are certain I am wrong. Especially then. I can warn you, explain the risk, and ask for a brief pause that can be verified, but I have no right to hold you after a clear refusal." Ayala was silent for a long time. "And today? Today you could not choose. Your body was showing danger, but it did not give me the right to control you without limit. I could only preserve the chance until the physician tested the connection. After that, the decision had to return to you. He did not call himself right. He did not ask for gratitude in return." Ayala nodded, as though she had heard not a justification, but the condition on which their conversation could continue at all. "At the commission, you will not disclose what I told you." And you will not use it to keep your clearance. I won't. 2 days later, they met at a joint hearing. The court representative placed the protocol in front of Voronov and calmly suggested that he explain to the commission why Ayala had reached for the door. Her personal condition will confirm that the intervention was necessary, he said. You only need to name the reason. Voronov looked at Ayala. She sat upright, but her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. No, he said. The court representative raised an eyebrow. You are refusing the only explanation that could preserve your clearance. It is not my explanation. Then you accept the charge of disobeying an order? I disobeyed the order, and I accept the consequences. But I will not disclose her confession, and I will not ask for an excuse on the basis of it. Ayala did not thank him. She only unclenched her fingers. The chief physician sent a request to the head of the Human Command's medical service through the official liaison of the Human Mission, and the liaison registered it. The head of the medical service confirmed his authority, and the personnel department forwarded Voronov's personal records and the old orders removing him from his post to the Joint Commission's sealed case file. The contents of the documents had not yet been read aloud. The commission had to determine whether the present violation was an isolated incident or continued a series of Voronov's earlier decisions in service. And at this hearing, he had already refused to use the vulnerability entrusted to him as an excuse. Ayla had left the door between them open, but the right to enter now belonged only to her. The commission chair opened the first folder and went straight to the final entry. Several years earlier, Voronov had been ordered to stop treating an injured man and clear a bed in an overcrowded field hospital. He refused. The injured man survived, regained consciousness 2 days later, and eventually confirmed the circumstances of his rescue himself. The court representative looked up from the document. So the violation was deemed justified? No, the chair replied. The outcome did not cancel the order or make disobedience lawful. He read out the disciplinary ruling. For 6 months, Voronov was stripped of the right to lead field evacuations. Voronov himself returned to his unit as an ordinary medic and carried out the orders of those he had once commanded. Ayala looked at him. Voronov made no attempt to present the penalty as a badge of honor. He stood there with his bandaged hand and listened as though they were talking about someone else's service record. The chair placed the first document to the right and touched the second, still sealed folder. A different injured person in the second case? Ayala asked. Yes, Voronov replied. She put the next question to him, not to the commission. Did he survive? No. The answer came before the chair could open the folder. Voronov did not ask them to read out the circumstances first, did not add that he had done everything possible, and did not try to soften the short word. The chair broke the seal. The final record in the second case stated, 3 witnessed responses had not changed the outcome. The injured person had died. The final record also stated that Voronov had continued providing aid in defiance of a repeated order, even though the injured person had died. For that, he had been suspended from work with evacuation teams for 6 months. Ayla closed the second folder herself. For several seconds, her palm rested on the cover bearing the record of the death. While Voronov did not look away, Ayla raised her eyes to him. There was neither justification nor accusation in her face. 2 cases are enough to remove him completely, said the council representative. In one, his decision led to a rescue, but the order and the disciplinary action did not disappear. In the other, the patient died after 3 witnessed responses, and Voronov still continued providing aid in defiance of a repeated order. We cannot allow a foreign enlisted medic to decide again what is dangerous for the air. The chamber fell silent. Guards stood behind Ayala, and the chief court physician stood beside the chair. Now the demand no longer sounded like a precaution. They were turning it into a condition on which the princess's autonomy itself depended. If you leave him the right to intervene, the advisor continued, any order issued over your body can be challenged by his word. The court will see not your will, but your dependence on a man who once secured a rescue, and once failed to change the outcome. Ayala looked at the closed folders, then at Voronov. I am not restoring his clearance, she said. The advisor gave a barely perceptible nod, deciding he had heard agreement. And I am not ending the investigation. His decisions must remain in the record in full. He knowingly disobeyed orders and will answer for the consequences. The nod vanished from the advisor's face. Then what right are you talking about? Ayala took a clean sheet of protocol paper. The right to warn me, not replace me. If Voronov identifies a specific movement or a specific intervention involving my body as dangerous, that action is to be stopped immediately. Only until I decide for myself whether it is to continue. You want to stop the physician's orders on the word of a medic? No. I want that word to be impossible to ignore until I have checked for myself. She turned to Voronov. You do not begin treatment. You do not give orders to the guards, the physicians, or the retinue. You do not exercise this right over anyone except me. And you explain every stoppage before the commission, stating exactly which action you consider dangerous. I accept, he replied. Even if they suspend you again? This condition does not restore my position. I know. Ayala placed her personal seal beneath the order. In the presence of the council, the guards, and the chief physician, her decision became part of the official record. Voronov's clearance remained suspended. His hand remained injured. No record declared him unconditionally right. But from that day on, if someone was about to carry out a dangerous action against Ayala, the voice of the man who until recently had been called an overconfident savage had to be heard, and, for a short time, halt someone else's authority. The final decision still belonged to her.